Well, as the September 30th deadline for a government shutdown approaches, members of the House of Representatives return to Washington tomorrow to resume the battle over extending government funding through a continuing resolution, or what is called a CR. Now, in the coming days, House Speaker Mike Johnson is expected to continue efforts to pass such a stopgap measure, though the specific details of any legislation have not yet been announced. Now, there is an effort to attach a measure, the SAVE Act, which would protect federal elections by making sure that those who are in this country illegally and are not citizens cannot vote in federal elections. Well, joining me now with an update on the latest is Congressman Mark Alford. He serves on the House Armed Services Committee and the House Agriculture Committee. He represents the 4th Congressional District of Missouri. Congressman Alford, welcome back to Washington Watch.
Thank you, Tony. Good to be with you.
Well, after voting for a possible CR was delayed last week, there was talk among Republicans about building consensus. Are we seeing consensus yet? Are we there yet?
I certainly hope so, Tony. This must have attached to it the SAVE Act. We have already passed this in the House, been sent over to the Senate side, but Schumer in his Senate shenanigans has shut this thing down as well. And now we want to attach it to the continuing resolution for 6 months. And the reason we want to do that, we do not want to end up with an omnibus around Christmas and then something being shoved down our throat where we're forced to vote on it. We do not need a government shutdown right now. Let's make that very clear. We could lose the presidency. We could lose control of the House. We could possibly lose the Senate over this. We have to regain control of the legislature and the executive. And we've got to make sure that we have a continuing resolution for 6 months with a SAVE Act attached to it to make sure that only U.S. citizens vote in U.S. elections. It's very simple.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense, but that's probably why it's not too accepted by Democrats in the Senate. Let me ask you this, Congressman Alford. You've not been here that long, but you've already seen a pattern that has emerged, as you just described. We see the Democrats that they only want a short-term CR into December, year end, so that the members of Congress, their back is up against the wall to get home for Christmas, and so they cobbled together a massive omnibus bill, and it's filled with all kinds of goodies for the left, and it's forced upon members. And we see that time and time and time again. In fact, that's been the process for nearly the last 20 years.
Well, the Democrats want to play Santa Claus around Christmas time, and they do. They want to give everyone in America anything they can to gain power, to gain their votes. So we're not going to let that happen, Tony. This has got to end. We have to start living within our means. We take in $5 trillion in revenue each year and spend $7.5 trillion. We're gaining $1 trillion in debt every some 127 days, I believe, at this juncture, spending more on our interests than we are on our military. This has got to end. I am hopeful about one thing, Tony. You know, this time last year, we only had one of the 12 appropriation bills passed in the House. Now we have 5.
Right.
It's not all 12, right, but it's a good start. And this is kind of like turning an aircraft carrier in the middle of the ocean. It's not a ski boat, but we are changing the way and getting back to regular order in the House.
Yeah, that's a good point, Congressman Alford, because that represents, even though it's 5 of the 12, it represents about 72% of the government funding. The House has done that. The Senate has not. The Senate has not approved any of the funding bills yet. They're continuing to sit on setting up this scenario that we just described. Now, you serve on the House Armed Services Committee. One of the holdups here on this 6-month CR have been kind of what we call the defense hawks. There are some who say this could harm military. Now, I was talking with Lindsey Graham over the weekend, who I don't think there's a bigger hawk than him when it comes to the military, and he says he doesn't see that. He actually sees it as you described. This is the best way to try to get a hold of the fiscal control of our federal government and the budgeting.
I like Lindsey Graham a lot. I know he's very intelligent when it comes to military matters. I also like Mike Rogers, our chairman of the House Armed Services Committee, a friend of mine, and he has a lot of intelligence on this. And look, the military will suffer. That is a hard fact. And if we do not increase our military spending, you know, with the way it is now, under the National Defense Authorization Act, a 1% increase it's really about a 3% cut in spending. And when communist China, Xi Jinping, is ready to take over Taiwan, and under the Taiwan Relations Act of the 1970s, we have committed to help in their self-defense. And so we've got to be prepared. We've got to be prepared for the pacing threat of communist China. They are breathing down the necks. They have their tentacles in everything we do. We've got a madman named Vladimir Putin, who's not only invaded Ukraine, but I think is ready to do some other dastardly things in Eastern Europe. And we have the mullahs in Iran, which this failing president has funded through the release of $16.5 billion in frozen assets that they have now used to fund the Houthis, who've just fired more missiles at Israel. We've got to get a strong leader back in the White House. We've got to right the ship when it comes to our budget and get spending back on track.
Is this, when it comes, let's talk about the military for just a moment, Congressman Alford. Is it a funding issue or is it a focus issue? I mean, the military, I just read this article over the weekend, the military celebrating the first co-ed submarine. More of the DEI stuff that you have been so effective in pointing out, that's what they celebrate. They don't celebrate military readiness and being lethal.
We are changing that. Rest assured, every time we get the generals in front of us, we ask them pointed questions on this. We have stripped out a lot of the DEI CRT programs, defunded them. In the latest NDAA, we have done that as well. It's taken a little bit of time to do that. But we've got to realize we don't need drag queens in the Navy trying to recruit. The only thing we need dragging in the Navy is anchors. And until we get these, I think, woke, progressive liberals out of the military, we're not going to restore confidence in our military. We have a recruitment crisis in the military where only 9% of America's young people have any interest in joining the military. Their fathers and grandfathers are saying, don't bother joining the military. It's too woke. We've got to change that.
Well, you and I agree on this. We could go down the list of reasons for that when you look at both the DEI, but then you look at the disastrous withdrawal from Afghanistan after 2 decades. There are those who are saying, I don't mind serving my country and I don't mind making sacrifices, but it needs to be for something that we're not going to walk away from, like we saw in Afghanistan, where the latter is worse than the former. Before we just have a couple minutes left, Congressman Alford, I want to get your thoughts on yet another assassination attempt on former President Donald Trump.
Well, look, I think it's despicable that, we cannot adequately protect, although the Secret Service did a good job this time. This guy was not, I don't think, a true assassin. In effect, that, a true assassin with any smarts is not going to have his barrel sticking out through the fence like that. I'm glad the Secret Service was ahead of President Trump, caught this guy, shot at him. He is going to be brought to justice. But, we've got to make sure that the Homeland Security is doing its job. They now have control over the Secret Service. I personally think we need to move the Secret Service back over to the Treasury Department. I think they did a much better job under Treasury. This Mayorkas character, the so-called Secretary of Homeland Security, has not done his job. He hasn't done his job at the border. I don't think he's even spoken out about this latest assassination attempt. We've got to make sure that the programs are adequately funded and staffed to make sure that present, past, and future presidents and executives are protected.
Congressman, we really don't have time to go down this path, but we've got 30 seconds left. I got to ask you this. So is this not a reflection of a much deeper problem in our society where we have such violence in our streets and attempts to kill our leaders?
Not only that, it's the rhetoric coming from the left. And look, I know there's a lot of harsh language coming from the right. We need to tone it down. When you start calling a former president, calling him Nazi and Hitler, and that he's a threat to democracy. I've been called a threat to democracy. We just had Jim Jordan here in our district. We went to the Chiefs game, and he gets death threats all the time. There are death threats of so many congressmen and leaders in our country. They've got to tone it down. Let's argue over the issues and win people over with argumentation, reason, and logic.
I agree, and that's part of the challenge that we've seen the left not wanting to have debates, and so we no longer reach consensus through what historically has been very American, that is debates.
Yes.
Congressman, thanks so much for joining us. Always great to see you.